Hey there, welcome to Takeaway with Sam Oches, a podcast from Nation's Restaurant News. I am Sam Oches, editor-in-chief here at NRN, and this is the show where I give you an all-access pass to the restaurant industry's most influential decision-makers. This week, I'm talking with Andrew Pudalov, the founder and CEO of Rush Bowls, a Boulder, Colorado-based concept celebrating 20 years in business this year. The brand has grown to about 50 locations across the country, leaning into Andrew's knowledge of national distribution channels and his tight control of supply relationships to streamline the growth process. Andrew joined the podcast to talk about how a retail partnership with Whole Foods gave him a crash course in national distribution and how he pivoted to franchising after his copacker closed up shop. In this conversation, you will learn more about why some brands are better suited to meet this moment where Dayparts are shifting, why tight control of your supply relationships will ease expansion, and why you need to strictly police and enforce your brand standards with your franchisees. Jumping now into my interview with Rush Bowls founder Andrew Pudalov. Also, don't forget to stick around after this interview as I will share my 6 takeaways from this discussion, actionable insights that you can take with you on the go. Okay, I'm sitting here with Andrew Pudalov, the CEO and founder of Rush Bowls. Andrew, thanks for taking some time today.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. So, Andrew, we've connected a few times. I've had the pleasure of dining at a Rush Bowls at least once in life, and I know I've got one not so far from my house, so I need to make sure I get there more often. But for those who are tuning in and are asking themselves, what is Rush Bowls? Tell me, what's the elevator pitch for this brand?
Sure. Well, first, I started the brand 20 years ago, so we're the pioneer really in the bowl space to begin with. Rush Bowls. It's healthy blended fruit and vegetable bowls on the go. And that was always the concept. So it's a unique mixture of flavors. We're very targeted on bowls and smoothies. We don't really focus on a lot of the esoteric items on there. We are clean nutrition on the go, and we're really clean nutrition. So no sorbets, no junk. Everything is super low calorically and super nutritious.
Got it. All right. So you were not in food service before Rush Bowls, right? What were you doing beforehand, and how did you get into this business?
So I have a little bit of a unique story. I was global head of fixed income derivative trading in New York City. So I took major bets on behalf of different banks. And 9/11 happens. I'm living in New York City with my wife and 2 children. My wife was in the tower in 93 when they first bombed it. And then 9/11 was her first day back from maternity. And I'm in Midtown and she's in the 20s. And it was kind of catastrophic. I lost a number of close friends that day.
Wow.
And we decided right there and then that we're going to move out. And fortuitously, I was really good at what I did. It afforded me the opportunity to move anywhere in the country. I chose Boulder for lots of reasons. And I wanted to do something I had no knowledge about and build it from scratch. And living in New York at the time and going, 20 some odd years ago, your choices for lunch, especially with children, were, hot dog, grilled cheese or pizza, basically, and maybe throw in some chicken fingers if it's a diverse menu. And then I wanted to really recreate that. And I wanted to start in a college community that I felt would really care about what they're eating. And that gave birth right away to Rush Bowls. And we focused on bowls right away. So we spent a lot of time in education, honestly, 20 years.
I was going to say, because when I think about this category, I know you and a couple others have been kicking around for a couple decades here, but still 20 years, that is a really long time. Tell me about the evolution of this category from the days Rush Bowls first opened to now.
It's really been quite dynamic because we really focused on bowls, and there was a lot of really, I would say, time that people didn't know what it was. Was it a lunch? Was it a breakfast? Was it a dinner? And what time to eat it? What was the nutritional benefits of it? They all liked it, and I'm a big texture guy, so I like a lot of different textures in my food. So that really gave tremendous, validity to how people were eating it, I would say. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, the evolutions, I think, first of all, we handle any diet period. Gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan, whatever your heart desires. And that really has evolved, being more concerned about people's diets and their allergies. For instance, we don't upcharge for allergies, right? So if you want something gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan, we don't upcharge for that. That's unheard of in the industry.
Hmm.
Also, just people now more just are eating it as their lunch or dinner every day. So, opposed to I'm going to try this, it's a set structured meal throughout their life. And then the crowd has gotten a lot older. So
Mm.
not only do you deal with the teens, but your young adults. And now these people over 20 years have gotten older and older, and it's their children. They're eating it in their 50s, right? So I think the evolution of the customer base has evolved into a much older customer base. Not that it's old, it's still extremely young, but it's more
Yeah.
mature. It's probably a better way of saying it.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, thinking about like the core demographic of this category, when I first was introduced to acai bowls, my head actually jumped to, oh, this is a treat. This is like dessert. In my head, this is healthy ice cream, basically. But, of course, I know those lifestyle customers, that's where it really took off, folks who are trying to take care of their bodies. But I imagine that must have expanded. I mean, to your point, your age demographic expanded, but you must have also people who are dieting and people who are looking for treats, right?
Well, we really don't focus on the people looking for treats, right? So
Mm.
within our demographic, because our product is healthier than most of the other products out there, we don't do sorbets, we don't do a lot of the cocktails or other stuff. That's why we're probably a third the calories than most of the brands out there. We use real fruit. So people are using it as meals. Certainly toppings, it gets a little more kind of uh, I guess friendlier to dessert. Sometimes people
Indulgent,
may
yeah.
want chocolate on top. We have a chocolate covered strawberry bowl, which I would say is a little bit more of our more indulgent bowls. But certainly the focus is really health and meal oriented. So, certainly how people eat it, it's up to them. But generally, we see meal orientation.
Got it. All right. So you started in Boulder. Boulder, obviously, a town where I'm sure they embrace these lifestyle kind of concepts. But as you've grown, you've franchised and you've grown kind of across the country. What do you find, considering this demographic question? What do you find is sort of your sweet spot for where you find Rush Bowls does the best?
I think inline communities, right?
Mm.
So, I think this is a community centric kind of business model. We have everything, honestly. We have cities, which do very well. We have college communities, which do well. But I would think, from what we see in the data, inline communities do the best, that there's a real community outpouring and a real focus on health. And that's whether it's cold or hot. The stores do well, whether it's almost irrelevant to where you're located. It's more how it's run.
Got it. Yeah, I believe so. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and I believe the closest location to me is right by Ohio State, but also right by a development where there is a lot of residential. So that to me seems like the perfect sweet spot.
Yes, and that's actually a corporate store now.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well that goes into the conversation around franchising. How has franchising been key to the Rush Bowl's growth?
Well, certainly, I going back, we only started franchising in 2016, and that really kind of digressing a little bit. I started a wholesale company. We were in 40 states with Whole Foods of frozen bowls.
Hmm.
We had copacker making the frozen bowls, and then hence we were in HEBs and this in Whole Foods. Unfortunately, my copacker in 2015 closed overnight and kind of punished 7 different brands that were being made there. But I understood national distribution. So it afforded
Hmm.
me the opportunity to distribute nationally and distribute a brand in 20 states. So we're really fortuitous to have that understanding and have that kind of brand loyalty all around the nation. So it's also graduates from CU and other colleges recognize the brand and can grow the brand extensively because of that.
Got it. Well, and it's interesting. You were in business then for 14, 15 years before you made the decision to franchise. Was
Yeah.
your original pledge to keep it corporate? And if so, why was that the original vision?
I think it was originally not really to keep it corporate, but to have it as a frozen item for everyone to eat nationally.
Hmm.
Because it was not, it was, to go in a freezer like you would have an ice cream pint in a freezer. And a
Hmm.
lot of companies have followed up on that. Some have been successful, some haven't. Um, but certainly was to get it in everyone's mouth, the most popular flavors for nutrition, really for dietary needs, let alone anything else. Um, I only started franchising in 2016 because I really felt that I wanted to see the model grow and really support these communities, maybe where there isn't a Whole Foods, or maybe there has the focus on health was just kind of exploding more. And I felt that we could certainly take advantage of it and bring on some great partners that could work within their community to grow the brand.
Got it. Well, so it's interesting because, considering your experience then in retail, I imagine with this sort of new environment that we're in that has been creeping up for a long time, but certainly expedited by the pandemic, this environment of off-premises everything and, the definition of a restaurant has completely changed because so
Yeah.
much of it's just really access to food, not necessarily the storefront. I imagine your experience in retail and distribution in that manner must have helped a lot considering this world we're in now. So what were some of the lessons that you pulled from being in that distribution model originally to today, where it's like, I'm sure most of your business is off premises and I'm sure you are exploring all of these other channels. Do you feel like that gave you a leg up in the end?
I would say we had a leg up on a couple of fronts. First of all, I really understand international markets, right? So even the start of COVID, we moved all our packaging to the U.S. before COVID really took impact. Um, and if you want to digress, is I understood what was going on a global situation with COVID and the ramifications of it. So it forced us to not have shortages on packaging and most foods. We didn't run out. We were over ordering. We had things very well set up for what was going on in the world economy at the time, which was unusual. And I would say my adept financial background really helped me with understanding what would happen and the avenues to make sure that our partners were in good shape for whatever would come forward. We're also different because unlike a lot of the companies out there, we're small square footage. So we're anywhere
Hmm.
from 300 square foot to 1,200 square foot.
Hmm.
We're very efficient business model with 30 to 60% of our business takeout or delivery. So we were really uniquely positioned to take advantage, is probably the wrong word to use, but benefit from COVID's scenario and really have people focus on health and wellness, which led to our, certainly to some of our growth and certainly, happy customers.
So considering that growth, you say you started franchise in 2016. I know you guys are in growth mode now. Tell me about sort of the growth trajectory. And, you have all these years where your expertise is in that retail channel. Now you're franchising. And I have to imagine, because I know just the state of things, the climate of the, financial markets and restaurant industry, have to imagine you have a lot of demand in franchising, because I think there's a lot of folks out there who are hungry for some great new concepts to franchise. What's your growth trajectory been like since you started franchising? And are you doubling down on that, real brick and mortar footprint, 300 to 1,200 square feet?
There's a couple of fronts. First, I'm a little different. So we're not private equity, right?
Hmm.
So I own everything. So I'm not under the gun or want to exploit franchisees for other than I want successful partners. Um, so I'm not under the gun to have a certain number by a certain year because I have to get a certain return. It affords me the luxury of picking partners that I want to partner with and grow at the pace that we want to grow at. But we're at 52 stores right now. We have, I know, 10 stores opening between now and like second quarter of this year. So we're doing a lot of traveling and a lot of opening of stores. I would hope to have around 70 to 75 stores this year, over 100 next. So there is a rapid growth rate. But I'm going to grow how I feel appropriate. That's not going to, I'm not, let's put it another way. I'm going to grow in a way that is appropriate for our success, not
Hmm.
because I have to hit certain metrics.
Sure.
And that affords me the luxury to do it the way that I think is best for our partners. And that's a lot different than pretty much everyone else out there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what's that split between corporate and franchise locations?
It's mostly, we have 3 corporate and 49 franchise.
Got it. And so that's the goal going forward, to keep that split about the same.
Yeah, I think depends on the opportunities that are presented, but yeah, pretty much.
Gotcha. All right. So going back to the evolution of things, we were talking about before we hit record on just sort of this nature of, day parts and how consumers are eating today, because we've been writing a lot at NRN recently about, snacking and the rise of snacking, and how you see a lot of the major chains are starting to roll out, snack type items or treats to add for maybe dessert or late night day part. It just feels like everything, certainly post COVID and with all of the various digital tools and how consumers interact with brands, it feels like things are starting to spread out a little bit beyond the traditional 3 day parts. And my question for you is how that's affected Rush Bowls. Do you guys find that you're starting to see things move around a little bit in terms of the popularity of the day parts? Is Rush Bowls a snacking occasion more so than a breakfast occasion? What does all that look like?
Well, that's certainly a great question. I think, first of all, we're a little different because we're like one size, really, because you need that size to blend the fruits. So our bowls are 16 ounces and our smoothies are 24 ounces. So that already is setting the structure for meals. But from the data we're seeing, and we do have complementary products. We're not in doing panini salads and all that other stuff that, I think confuses the customer and doesn't help the customer. And for the most part, I don't think sells well. We focus on bowls and smoothies, kind of like Starbucks. We focus very narrow on a very diverse flavor set. And then we have complementary products like Rush Bites, which are peanut butter bowls that we make everything. We run our own peanut butter in-house. We grind everything from scratch and do all that stuff. And what we're seeing, which I think is fascinating, is much later day parts, we're seeing huge sales. Some of the biggest sales of the day could be 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night.
Wow.
So people are getting big meals, especially in more, cities, I would say.
Hmm.
But we're seeing a big surge later in day, which I'm personally surprised about, right? So, we've always, biggest time of day generally is lunch for us. We're a huge lunch business. Obviously busy breakfast and then dinner, but then that late, either people are working much later or looking for that nutritious meal late at night because they had a light dinner and not sure, they don't want to eat ice cream, as you're saying, or something that
Right.
they want something very filling, but it's going to keep them tied to morning.
Interesting. I mean,
But
if I were
that is
you,
fascinating.
it's
That's so
so
late.
fascinating. I would have almost like not even left my doors open that late if I'm running a bowl concept, because in my head that doesn't necessarily process that it would be a good fit for late night. How do you respond to that? Are you adjusting your hours? Can you innovate around late night type bowls?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways. Certainly, we're adjusting our hours, and it depends on what community you're in. Obviously, in
Sure.
more dense communities, that there's kind of a later night activity, you definitely want to do it there. We haven't adjusted our flavor sets as readily yet. We have a brand new menu coming out in the next month or two, which, again, doing this 20 years, brand new is kind of, we know which old ones that were favorites we're bringing back and stuff like this, and then new flavors, spices that relaunch. But I I believe it's just more a general demand for the product opposed to a specific flavor set.
Mm,
And I think people want, to stay in shape, and they don't want to eat a pint of ice cream at 9 o'clock at night. They'll get this and feel really good and know it's, 350 calories opposed to 1,000, right?
right.
And wake up feeling great. It doesn't, like, you don't get that sugar high and low because we don't use the sorbets and all that other juice cocktails or whatever those other companies do.
Gotcha. Tell me about menu innovation, because I imagine, I mean, on one hand, you're limited to fruit-based items for the most part, and I also imagine that you're also limited based on supply, which I'd love to get into. But talking specifically about menu innovation, since you brought it up, how much wiggle room do you have? How often do you try new crazy ideas? How much do you follow new trends that are out there? What does that innovation process look like?
Well, we have 52 stores with employees, and I have my own employees in my own stores that we're constantly innovating and testing. So, that's fun for us. I think more and more spices come into play, and we do a lot with fruits and vegetables, and certainly as whether it's kale, avocado, all sorts of different mixtures of whatever it may be. Um, Fruits are interesting because certain fruits go together better than others. It's not like, hey, I can throw this together and it'll taste good. That's not the case. Certain fruits
Yeah.
play together after doing this for a long time, play together better than others. What we look at also with innovation is, we, uniquely make our grind our own peanut butter, but we also make our own jams. And what does that look like? We use chia seeds, and we don't pump it with sugar, and stuff like that. And it
Hmm.
tastes great with different mixtures of complementary products to the bowl, like a spicy honey that we make in house, or a cinnamon honey that's going to give it that third layer of flavor. I'm going to start doing a big push into jams in particular that will add another texture level within a bowl, or even a smoothie of more of a unique flavored, like, a spicy mango flavor, like that you can put with, different bowls. So a different level of texture and flavor that's going to pop in your mouth. And that's what
Mm.
we're looking at with menu and innovation. Again, also certainly taking out anything scoopable. So we're actually, we offer some of our bowls and smoothies have yogurt. We're actually taking that off the menu, and it's going to be an add-in if you like. So we're really want to make sure anyone can have it their way, but also nothing that may have ingredients you don't need.
Yeah. It's interesting competitive advantage. I imagine it's an advantage for you that you're doing a lot of this from scratch in house. And this is not to be cynical to the consumer base today, but I feel like a lot of people, I mean, my impression of the restaurant industry largely over the last, call it 6, 7, 8 years, is this mentality of convenience versus, yes, they still want high quality foods, but I feel like customers are so often thinking about convenience that perhaps they start to overlook things like quality and things like that. I guess I'm curious to know from you how much you do feel like this sort of from scratch approach that you have in Rush Bowls. How does that prove to be a competitive advantage? How do you, I guess, leverage it in the best possible way so it does become a competitive advantage?
Well, first of all, the flavor is different, right?
Hmm.
So it doesn't have that kind of artificial or Diet Coke flavor, right? So I think that's a big advantage. When we grind our own peanut butter, we're not adding oils, and it has that like richness to it, just from ground peanuts. And same thing, there's certain, like a homemade apple pie is going to taste very different than King Super's apple pie or a Kroger apple pie. So
Hmm.
that flavor, where I think we as a company are efficient, is production, right? So we have to make it that it's, for us, it's 2 minutes or less for every bowl produced, right? So you have 2 minutes. Once you order, it's 2 minutes from soup to nuts that it's done and served to the consumer. And that's
Hmm.
training. That's making sure that, we understand the ingredients. And that's including have it your way, right? Burger King made it very famous of have it your own way. But if you're dealing with sorbet bases and pre-made junk, I'll call it, but pre-made stuff, you can't do that. And that's
Right.
not our business model. So as much as it may be in this day and age that people are, just want a bowl and they don't really care, I don't really follow that philosophy. And I think ultimately over time, these companies will try to either rotate themselves into healthier, or they'll go out of business.
Yeah. How much do you work this into your marketing and your, materials in the restaurant? Are you communicating this at every point that the customer turns, basically?
I think we can do a better job at it if you want to know the truth. But
Hmm.
certainly we communicated. I think as a company, we can do a better job at really relating it. It's certainly on all our menus, our digital menus. We certainly communicate it, but certainly there's always room for improvement since it's such a big differential and since it tastes so much different and since we're so much more nutritious.
Hmm. Okay, I mentioned I wanted to talk about supply chain. I imagine this is a piece to the Rush Bowls equation that is very, very important. And of course, we saw in the pandemic real issues with supply chain arise. And I would guess that was especially true for fruits and vegetables that you guys are sourcing. Tell me about how complicated the supply for Rush Bowls is. How do you navigate the complexities of it to ensure you're still running a profitable business?
It's really, this is one thing I focus as CEO a lot of time on. And most CEOs probably don't do that. It's probably better use of their times. But um, I think it's so imperative to the success of the franchise. So I'm negotiating directly with the manufacturers to making sure that this product supply continual, that the distributors are pass-throughs basically, right? So we have national distribution, and then every store that we work with will have backup distribution.
Mm,
So to make sure that certainly the core ingredients of us, excuse me, is always there for the franchisees, and making sure the suppliers we're using are well aware of what our demands are and what we demand of them for us to
mhm,
do business. So we have national suppliers, and certainly it's trickier in, when you look at this on in 22 states than in super regionals. It's much
mhm.
harder to do how we did this business. It's much harder in multi-state kind of situation. But again, we had a knowledge base in that. That's why we did it this way. And it's a competitive advantage longer term. Um, so what we look at is everyone having a supplier and a backup supplier. In other avenues, there's always two other avenues. If that particular supplier is out, where else can you go? And we go over that. So whether you have an emergency situation and no one has fresh strawberries, and do you have a backup supplier on fresh strawberries or fresh blueberries or whatever it may be, and what are those suppliers? So it's like A list, B list, C list, and every franchisee is trained on all of this, and hopefully it never happens. But you always need a backup supplier, and we have those relationships built into almost every state.
Right. Yeah. So if I'm hearing this correctly, did you guys have a national supplier set up essentially before you went national? So essentially scaling this business was always easier than it otherwise would have been because you already had that national supply.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say we had it, but I understood the mechanics of everything. So when I
Hmm.
came to negotiate and work this out, I already knew how everything worked, right?
Right.
And whether you're with Whole Foods, you're generally using UNFI as a distributor. You don't really have a choice as readily. I understood what needs to be done on the distribution side, and it gave us, I certainly, an advantage, because then itself is, and that's why I love my job so much, is that franchising is very different than wholesale, which is very different
Yeah.
than owning a retail store. Other than sharing the name Rush Bowls, they're three dynamically different businesses, and that's why you kind of learn from everything and grow.
Yeah, sure. I imagine considering the high quality nature of the procedures in the restaurants and then the high quality nature of the supply, you must have to ensure higher standards for your franchise partners, for example, because you can't get that wrong. They can't cut corners and then suddenly Rush Bowls in a particular community is got this terrible reputation. So considering that, how are you going through the franchise process and ensuring you're finding these partners who align with the standards that you have?
And certainly I think that's a challenge on for all franchises, right?
Yeah.
Like follow the plan. There's a successful plan here. So certainly we police it to the best of our ability, and the punishment is severe, right?
Hmm.
So we will default them, we'll throw them out of the network pretty easily, because quite frankly, if they're not following the brand guidelines, I don't want them to serve a product that doesn't meet our specs. But it's also understanding where they're getting the products from and having
Hmm.
tight rules on where they're getting the products from. So they can't just look to, a local supplier for say bananas, right? And
Hmm.
bananas is probably a bad one to use, but we have a particular acai packet that we use. We don't use a sorbet, like I said earlier, but it's a particular brand, particular flavor. So we don't go outside that, and we try to police it the best we can and choose the partners that are going to maintain those rules. And if they don't, unfortunately, like anything else, we're going to kick them out of the system. It rarely
Sure.
happens. Everyone wants to do a good job and they want to be successful. So, but again, it's, unfortunate situation within franchising in general that, if people don't follow the rules, there's going to be something to pay for that. We do fly out. We do inspections. We do a lot of things to make sure that they're successful. And, being on top of it and making sure, everyone's doing the best they can and working with your partners. You have to work with them and to
Yeah.
really solve issues that may arise.
What are some other challenges you guys are facing these days? Other headwinds that might be, in the way for Rush Bowls as you guys grow?
I think the interesting one, and I'll go back to my financial roots, is interest rates.
Hmm.
Certainly, I think if people want to take an SBA loan out, being at 11, 12% is a different situation than 3%, let's say. So understanding the financial markets, I do think interest rates are coming down, and the Fed will ease before they tighten. So I think that's going to be helpful. I think people will be making career changes to build their own business like a Rush Bowl. So I think they're going to get an uptick on that as people may be getting out of tech or forced to get out of tech. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for growth in the franchising model. But the headwinds are somewhat limited, I would say, other than interest rates. I think there's a lot of competitors out there, but we're taking over a lot of stores. So we just took over some stores from Nectar. We're taking those stores over from Clean Juice that maybe have done a business, but wasn't really thought out in the manner that we have.
Hmm.
Again, I'm not under the gun for certain revenue hits. I have to, open 32 stores because that's what the private equity says. This is privately
Sure.
held, and I'm not under those type of constraints. So I want what's
Yeah.
best for the community, and we're pretty. We have a lot of open forum calls. We speak to our partners very frequently, and we try and kind of understand their market best we can too.
Well, I have to ask because you mentioned a couple of your competitors. Why don't you do juice? Because I know a lot of people like to do that trifecta: juice, smoothies, bowls. You're just smoothies and bowls.
Right. We always been just smoothies and bowls. I don't think the numbers are in there. If you
Hmm.
want to, I don't think there's a lot of risk, liability risk with whether it's not pasteurized or not. I think the risk isn't worth the return. Let's put it that way, probably that I
The
would say.
juice
I don't
isn't worth the squeeze, literally.
squeeze. No pun intended there. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
there's never
But
been a better use of that term.
I truly believe that. And I think
Yeah.
if you look at the companies in the space that are doing it, they're struggling. Many of them are.
Yeah.
So the two I just mentioned. So
Yeah. Yeah. We've seen that too. All right. So, Andrew, looking forward, what are some opportunities then for the Rush Bowls business? What are you most excited about for this business in the years ahead?
our growth and getting to communities that may not have had that benefit of health food as readily. We just opened our third store in St. Louis. One owner owns one franchisee, and hitting a lot of these different communities that maybe we're opening this weekend in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And that actually I'm super excited about because they have a child with Down syndrome, and the whole internal store was built for employees that may have special needs, right? So the lower counters, easier to operate, easy access to different doors and bathrooms, and a really handy, capable store, which we're extremely excited about. I think it's really the first of the kind for in this industry, really more bowls and smoothies that you can have it. Employing a broader range of employees. I think are all incredibly positive. And then I'm going to start more focusing on non-traditional formats. So we're always certainly looking at airports, but more arenas, more different venues that may be more kiosk-esque, which I think there's a lot of opportunity in.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Well, Andrew Pudalov, the CEO and founder of Rush Bowls, really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much, Andrew.
And thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
That was my interview with Rush Bowls founder Andrew Pudalov. So, what should you learn from this interview? Here are my 6 takeaways. My first takeaway is that day parts are shifting and some brands are better suited to meet this moment. I asked Andrew about this because here at NRN, we've been doing a lot of writing about day parts, but specifically around snacking and specialty beverages, as so many of the big chains have been rolling these out to their menus. And it's clear to us that what we're seeing is this shift in day parts to where customers are dining more in the late morning and mid afternoon and late night is clearly having an impact on the industry, and chains are trying to meet that moment by having more menu options that are a pick-me-up or an indulgence. Rush Bowls is in this interesting place where what it offers is healthy, yes, but is also kind of an indulgence because it can be seen as sweeter. I mentioned it's almost like a healthy ice cream, I think, but the point is that this item that has so often been seen as maybe a breakfast or a lunch, which is traditionally the busy day parts, as Andrew pointed out, he said it's starting to become really popular for late night. And you can theorize about why that might be. He says the restaurants that they have in more residential kind of lifestyle communities, that's where they're seeing more of this late night business. But I'm going to throw out there, I truly believe that acai bowls, these fruit bowls that Rush Bowls is serving, those are with this kind of sweet element and the fruit and vegetable sweet kind of combination. They can be seen as something that's an indulgence, maybe a post-dinner indulgence. And that could be why the late night hours are surging. And so that's why I do think, some restaurants out there are serving very traditional breakfast, lunch, and or dinner. They are right in the wheelhouse of those 3 day parts. But others that are offering something that fits those day parts and the mid-afternoon, late morning, late night kind of day parts, they are really well positioned for this moment, because in this moment, customers are changing their preferences for when they are eating out, when they are accessing food via off-premises channels or dine-in. And those restaurants that are set up to meet the moment with menu items that can fit into any of those day parts, I think are going to really find some fruitful, no pun intended, years here in the coming years. My second takeaway is that texture is just as important as flavor when you're exploring menu innovation. So Rush Bowls, last week we spoke with Juice It Up, and this week we're speaking with Rush Bowls. The big difference between these two concepts is Rush Bowls doesn't serve juice. However, they do have smoothies and bowls, acai bowls, much like, many other competitors in this category, such as Juice It Up, are now serving. When it comes to menu innovation with those items, last week we talked about some of the various new kinds of fruits that Juice It Up was exploring. But this week when I talked to Andrew for Rush Bowls, it was interesting because when he talked about menu innovation, it wasn't so much finding new fruits and vegetables as much as it was finding some of these new textures and perhaps some of these new spices that can add new elements to these dishes. The texture piece I thought was especially interesting. He said they're exploring things like chia seeds and this scratch-made peanut butter that they make in-house and jams that are adding new layers of texture. And I think that's really interesting because I mentioned last week, sometimes it feels like everything under the sun has been discovered and developed and put on a restaurant menu. But the fact of the matter is that when you bring in some new elements like texture, like spices, you can branch out beyond your traditional ingredients that you currently use for your menu and find new ways to bring excitement to the items on your menu. My third takeaway is that true customization is not possible if you're not making foods from scratch. This was a really interesting point that Andrew made. He mentioned kind of that have it your way like Burger King's done forever. That's the goal that they have. But as he pointed out, if you have a lot of prepackaged, pre-made foods, you can only offer so much customization to your customer. Depending on what type of restaurant you are and what kind of menu you're serving, your customers, if they have some dietary needs, restrictions, or preferences, you're only going to be able to go so far in customizing that food for them. At Rush Bowls, they're doing everything scratch made, even their peanut butter. Andrew said they're no longer making yogurts a part of signature items, but they're going to make it an option. the fact is that with all of these scratch-made foods, they're able to truly customize, customers are able to truly customize the dishes that best suit their dietary needs and their flavor preferences. And that may be the new definition of customization, is really going down to the granular level of, various ingredients that are offered to you. If you have pre-made foods, you're not going to really have that flexibility or that ability at all. My fourth takeaway is that tight control of your supply relationships will ease expansion. This was really the crux, I think, of what Andrew and I really got into, is the nature of supply chain and distribution and how much this has been a competitive advantage for Rush Bowls. As Andrew mentioned, he had a distribution partnership, a retail partnership with Whole Foods where they were serving frozen bowls. Through that, he learned all about national distribution. He learned about all about these national distributors that he had to go through. He built these relationships that all fell through in 2015, 2016 when the copacker closed. And when Rush Bowls pivoted to franchising for growth, Andrew had that extra strength, which was this knowledge of the supply chain and distribution that has been the sort of cheat code for Rush Bowls as it expands. He pointed out, franchisees, they make sure they have a backup distributor. They even have an A plan, a B plan, and a C plan, as he pointed out, that they have these backup plans in place for their franchisees so that if their first and primary distributor runs out of something, they've got a backup plan in mind. He said all franchisees are well trained in supply chain, so they understand exactly what they need to do. And all of this has come to bear because of that relationship he had with the national distributors, and also because he has these very close relationships directly with the manufacturers. With those relationships in place with the manufacturers and the distributors, he is able to kind of put this puzzle together a lot more easily as they franchise across the country. And I think it's just a good thing to keep in mind as you pursue your own expansion. You have to have those relationships in place. My fifth takeaway is that you need to strictly police and enforce your brand standards with franchisees. So, of course, so much of the conversation that Andrew and I were having was around the nature of the high-quality foods that they're serving, the scratch-made, high-quality foods served at Rush Bowls. And, as I suggested, this could make franchising difficult because you have to really protect your quality, and the franchisees are on the front line of doing that. So to Andrew's point, if the franchisee is not meeting that standard, if they're trying to cut any corners, and certainly when it comes to the supply, if they're trying to go their own way, Andrew is pretty strict about kicking them out of the system, as he said. It sounds harsh, but if you don't do that, if you start to let your standards slide, if you start to let franchisees get away with cutting corners, that reflects directly on the brand as a whole, and you could lose control of this narrative around quality. Enforce your franchise standards, police your franchise standards, pay very close attention. Make sure when you're franchising in the first place and bringing franchisees on board that they're very well trained in this. Because if you don't, again, you'll lose the narrative and the whole thing could come crumbling down. My sixth and final takeaway, this is kind of fun one Andrew threw in just there at the end of our conversation, but I thought it was really worth noting. You should consider developing a store prototype for employees with disabilities. He mentioned that Rush Bowls has a new franchisee opening up who has a child with Down syndrome, and they've developed this whole idea around really making the store accessible to employees who have a disability. And, that might mean lower counters, might be making sure the store is easier to operate, easier to access things. And I just love that idea because this is a whole opportunity in staffing that restaurants are missing out on. People with disabilities are looking for work, and they are often really phenomenal employees and can bring some great strength to your concept, but your restaurant isn't always well suited to them, and it might not be set up to make it that easy transition for them to work at your restaurant. Consider having some options with your store prototypes where you do have a store prototype that is considering employees with disabilities, because if a franchisee wants to go that direction and wants to really emphasize in their community, providing jobs for that community of folks with disabilities, it's a great opportunity for those employees, a great opportunity for community, and truthfully, it's a great opportunity for your brand. You're going to learn so much and just really bring that great opportunity to the table for your community. But you have to be prepared for it with your store layout, your kitchen layout, and all of the operations components that are there. Those are all my takeaways for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe to Takeaway wherever you listen to podcasts and leave your feedback. You can also email me at sam.oches@informa.com. Thanks again, and talk to you next week.